Hello, and welcome back to the Point and Quest podcast, the show where pixel puzzles meet narrative nuance. I'm Lindsay, or Pixelated Linz, and today we're taking a detour from the usual inventory shenanigans and frustrating rubber chicken puzzles to explore a niche. Games where your choices truly matter. Now, I know what you're thinking. Isn't every point and click just a series of choices? Like, should I pick up this suspiciously shiny object or use my trusty screwdriver on literally everything until something happens? And you wouldn't be wrong, usually. But what I'm talking about are games where your choices don't just unlock a hidden Easter egg or a snarky comment from a sassy protagonist. They change the entire trajectory of the story. We're diving into the games that put you in the driver's seat of the narrative, for better or for worse. So grab your dialogue wheel, put on your decision-making hat, and let's start clicking our way down some branching paths. Defining the genre. First things first. What do I mean by choices matter? Isn't that the whole point of any game? Well, yes and no. In classic point-and-click adventures, especially those by LucasArts or Sierra, you're mostly solving predetermined puzzles. The real challenge wasn't making choices, but figuring out what the developers wanted you to do. Like in the first King's Quest, where the real puzzle was figuring out you had to type push the witch instead of kill the witch, because clearly, in the land of Daventry, shoving is the text parser's weapon of choice. But today, we're diving into games where your decisions affect the story, the relationships, and even the world around you. Think of it as the difference between riding a roller coaster and being the person at the control panel deciding which way the ride goes, except with fewer lawsuits. Maybe. Fork in the road. Spotlight on key games. So let's kick this off with Lamplight City, a detective adventure set in a grim Victorian world. This game does what a lot of point and click shy away from. It lets you fail. Like, actually lets you. You can accuse the wrong suspect, close a case incorrectly, and the story just keeps rolling. Imagine if Sherlock Holmes decided halfway through the case that maybe he was the murderer, just for kicks. Developed by Francisco Gonzalez and published by Grandislav Games in 2018, Lamplight City skips the traditional inventory puzzles and focuses purely on dialogue and investigation. It's like a Victorian steampunk noir where you play a detective haunted by the ghost of his former partner, solving crimes and wrestling with your own crumbling sanity. It's heavy, but also a nice break from pixel hunting for a little red flag. The charm of Lamplight City lies in its commitment to consequences. You can fail cases and accuse the wrong people, and instead of game over, the story adapts. It feels less like a standard point and click and more like a Victorian fever dream mixed with choose your own adventure books. It makes you consider every choice carefully, because once the accusation is out there, you can't just load last save and take it back. It's a detective game that rewards your intuition or punishes your poor judgment, depending on how good a sleuth you are. Next, let's get into Unavowed, a supernatural noir from Wadjet Eye Games. Unavowed puts you in the shoes of a former bartender, actor, or cop who's been possessed by a demon for a year. Super casual, right? You join a secret society fighting supernatural threats in New York City, where your past influences how the story unfolds. And let's be honest, this is the only game where you can be an ex-bartender who's possessed and also interrogating a ghost, all before breakfast. It's a point-and-click adventure that feels like it's borrowed a page from RPGs, giving you character backstory options that affect dialogue choices and the plot. What sets Unavowed apart is its party system. You don't just gather clues solo. You pick 2 teammates for a roster of supernatural detectives. Eli the pyromancer, Mandana the half-djinn, Logan the medium. They each bring unique abilities and perspectives. Choose differently, and entire segments of the game play out in fresh new ways. It's like if Scooby-Doo had team drafts and sometimes left Shaggy at home because they needed more firepower. This really adds to the replayability of the game as well, which I always appreciate. The heart of Unavowed lies in its moral dilemmas. Your choices throughout the game lead to different outcomes and endings, with no clear right answer. Do you banish the demon back to oblivion, or find a way to make peace? The game masterfully captures that feeling of walking a tightrope, where your every decision impacts not just the ending, but your relationship with your party. And the story adapts to your choices. It's the tension that makes Unavowed such a compelling experience. Classic honorable mentions. Of course, we can't talk about branching narratives without mentioning The Longest Journey and its sequels, Dreamfall and Dreamfall Captures. These games ask you to make tough, emotional choices that impact the story. Again, it's less about solving puzzles and more about navigating a world where every choice feels like a leap of faith. It's like trying to decide whether to trust that one NPC who insists they've got a totally legit business deal for you. Spoiler, they rarely do. The roads less traveled, or lesser known gems. Let's talk about Heaven's Vault. You play as an archaeologist, deciphering ancient languages, and every translation choice you make changes the narrative. Misinterpret a symbol, and your entire understanding of history could shift, much like the real world. It's a high-stakes history test where every answer rewrites the past. The weight of your choices is palpable because the game world adapts to your interpretation. It's genuinely one of the most creative uses of choice in narrative designs. And it's kind of inspired me to start working on my own point-and-click adventure game, which maybe I'll talk about in another episode. Retro Rewind. How did we get here? Looking back, games like Blade Runner from 1997 were pioneers of this concept. They had multiple endings and complex decision-making mechanics before branching narratives were even a trend. You could play through it multiple times and get different kinds of experiences each round. It set the stage for choice-driven narratives we see today, proving that even back then, players craved the kind of stories where their decisions felt meaningful and were meaningful. So why do we as players love games where choices matter? Maybe it's because they mirror the messiness of real life. Unlike classic point and clicks, where there's a right solution, these games embrace ambiguity. They force us to live with the consequences of our actions, to ponder our own moral compasses. And that's a lot more interesting than just figuring out which key fits the door. Thanks for joining me on this branching path of an episode of the Point & Quest podcast. Whether you've been accused of a crime you didn't commit in Lamplight City, or you've banished a demon and possibly your own moral compass in Unavowed, I hope you've enjoyed exploring these games where choices matter. Because let's face it, the real magic of these experiences isn't just in finding out what happens. It's in those quiet, reflective moments when you ask yourself, did I make the right choice? Because if you think about it, that's what these games really are tapping into. The part of us that wants to believe we're in control of our own story. The part of us that's curious to see what happens if we pick the unexpected option, if we take the road less traveled. If you've enjoyed this episode, let me know. You can write me at pixelatedlens@aol.com and tell me your favorite choice-driven adventure games. I've already received some great suggestions from folks on games I haven't played before, and I love to hear about the stories that stuck with you long after the credits rolled. Until next time, keep those dialogue wheels turning and your moral compasses, well, pointed somewhere in the general vicinity of good. This is Lindsay, signing off from the Point & Quest podcast. Happy adventuring, and remember, when in doubt, always click the shiny object.
You never know what might happen.